At 8:16 in the morning, a military line from Hiroshima stopped answering. Not slowly, not with a warning. It simply went dead. In Tokyo, the operator on the other end waited for the next signal. He adjusted the equipment. He checked the circuit. He tried the line again. Nothing. To him, that did not yet mean a city had been erased. It meant a connection had failed. And that was the first terrible mistake. Because on the morning of August 6th, 1945, Hiroshima did not disappear from Tokyo as a catastrophe. It disappeared as a technical problem. A single American B-29 had crossed the coast earlier that morning. Japanese radar had tracked it, but a single aircraft was not supposed to mean a major attack. Air raid alerts in Hiroshima had already been raised and cleared. The city had lived under warnings before. The army had a routine for this kind of overflight. Observe, wait, do not waste fighters on one plane. No intercept went up. Anti-aircraft crews relaxed. People stepped back into the fragile rhythm of wartime mourning. Then the line went silent. At Imperial Army General Staff Headquarters in Tokyo, officers began with the explanation they already understood. Maybe a conventional bomb had struck a communications center. Maybe a relay had failed. Maybe a depot near the military district had been hit. That would be serious. But serious was familiar. Serious had procedures. Serious could be measured. Lieutenant General Torashiro Kawabe, Deputy Chief of the Army General Staff, received the first disturbing report sometime after 9 o'clock. The report was not, Hiroshima has been destroyed. It was, Hiroshima cannot be reached. That difference mattered. A destroyed city demands a political answer. A city that cannot be reached demands a technician, a staff officer, a plane. So Tokyo sent a plane. The army dispatched an officer to look from the air and report what had happened. This was standard. It was the way commanders assess damage after large conventional raids. Fly over, estimate the burned area, identify the target, return with numbers. But that procedure depended on one assumption: that there would still be a city beneath the aircraft. There was not. When the officer reached the Hiroshima area, he looked down on a smoking emptiness where a city of roughly 350,000 people had stood that morning. Streets were no longer acting like streets. Neighborhoods no longer held their shapes. A command headquarters that should have been reporting to Tokyo had become part of the silence Tokyo was trying to explain. The 2nd General Army, based in Hiroshima under Field Marshal Shunroku Hata, had been built to coordinate the defense of Western Japan against the Allied invasion everyone expected would come. Hata survived, but survival was not command. His staff was shattered. Communications were gone. The headquarters was no longer functioning as a headquarters. Tokyo was waiting for a report from a structure that could no longer report. And the radio system had its own version of the same failure. In Tokyo, engineers at Japan Broadcasting Corporation noticed that the Hiroshima relay had dropped out. To an engineer, a relay station going dark has a category. You log it, you test it, you reroute, you try to reach local technicians. But the local technicians were not answering. The morning broadcast across Japan continued anyway. Music played, agricultural guidance aired, civil defense instructions moved through the network in the same official tone the public had heard for years. For civilians in Osaka, Kyoto, Fukuoka, Sendai, or Sapporo, the morning sounded controlled, measured, almost normal. And that, too, was part of the system. Japan's Wartime Information Bureau had been created to control the public story. It managed newspapers, radio, film, announcements, and the emotional temperature of the home front. Its purpose was not only to hide bad news. It was to make bad news fit a national script. The war was difficult, but not lost. The enemy was cruel, but Japan was unbroken. Cities could burn, but morale could be managed. By August of 1945, that script had already been strained nearly to breaking. Tokyo had burned. Osaka had burned. Nagoya had burned. Smaller cities had burned. The Bureau had learned how to acknowledge damage while turning every disclosure into endurance. But Hiroshima was not damage in the old sense. Hiroshima was a hole in the information system. The apparatus for controlling the message was still running. The message itself had vanished. By early afternoon, fragments began reaching Tokyo from the edges of the disaster. Railway workers, telegraph operators outside the ruined zone, military personnel who had been far enough away to survive. None of them told the same story in the same words. Some said there had been one flash. Some said a blast. Some said fire came without warning. Some said the light had been visible over water. But the most important thing about the reports was what they did not contain. They did not contain a functioning city. Outside Hiroshima, survivors were walking. They moved along roads and rail lines. Some burned so badly that witnesses later remembered the silence more than the screams. The living carried the first true broadcast out of Hiroshima on their skin. Doctors in surrounding towns saw burns they could not categorize. Whole limbs marked by heat before flame. Hair beginning to fall from people who seemed, at first, to have survived. Bleeding without obvious wounds. Weakness that had no name yet. The radio still had no language for any of this. The people did. But people on foot move more slowly than government statements. By evening on August 6th, the Hiroshima relay was still dark. NHK engineers could mark the outage. They could route around the gap. They could keep the national schedule moving. What they could not do was fill the silence with truth. Because truth, that day, was not traveling through wires. It was walking away from the city. The first official statement did not reach the Japanese public until the evening of August 7th, more than a full day after the bomb. The Imperial General Staff acknowledged that Hiroshima had suffered considerable damage from enemy bombing. It said the enemy had used a new type of bomb. It said details were under investigation. It condemned the attack as inhuman. That was all. No casualty number, no description of the destroyed headquarters, no admission that Tokyo had spent hours unable to understand what had happened, no useful instruction for a mother in Yamaguchi with a son in Hiroshima, no neighborhood names, no hospital list, no road guidance. No way to know whether silence meant death, injury, evacuation, or simply broken wires. For most of Japan, the statement sounded grave but familiar. Considerable damage, new type of bomb, enemy cruelty, investigation ongoing. The words were designed to stay inside a known frame, but around Hiroshima, the frame had already broken. Families did not need a broadcast to know something was wrong. They had seen the glow. They had felt windows tremble far from the city. They had watched burned people arrive without luggage, without shoes, without the ability to explain what had happened except by pointing back toward the smoke. A government statement can reduce a catastrophe to a phrase. A burned survivor standing in the doorway cannot be compressed that way. By August 7th, those two realities existed side by side. On the radio, Hiroshima was a damaged city under investigation. On the roads, Hiroshima was a human column. The military also began receiving more detailed reports. Officers outside the city described a radius of near total destruction. Medical personnel described casualties so concentrated there was no organization left to count them. The attack did not behave like an ordinary raid. There were no waves of bombers, no long pattern of impacts, no broad sequence of explosions. One plane had come, one bomb had fallen. A city had become a question. Inside Japan's leadership, that question did not produce instant surrender. That is one of the most misunderstood parts of the story. The atomic bombings did not land inside a government already united around what they meant. They landed inside a leadership deadlock. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, War Minister Korochika Anami, and the military chiefs were already trapped between two futures. One side believed Japan needed to seek an end through the best terms it could still get. The other believed the homeland could still bleed an invasion badly enough to force negotiation. Hiroshima intensified the argument. It did not end it. Then, on August 9th, the pattern repeated. The primary target that day was Kokura. The bomber circled through cloud and smoke, unable to release clearly. Fuel ran low. The crew turned toward the secondary target, Nagasaki. A break opened in the clouds for less than a minute. The bomb fell through it. At 11:02 in the morning, another city entered the same terrible sequence. Flash, blast, smoke, silence. In Tokyo, word came that the Nagasaki relay had gone quiet. Now, to the people with access to both pieces of information, the pattern was unmistakable. But the public still did not have both pieces. Hiroshima had still not been fully explained. The second public statement used language close to the first. A new type of bomb. Considerable damage. Investigation ongoing. Enemy inhumanity. For families near Nagasaki, those words did what they had done to Hiroshima's families. They named the disaster without revealing it. That same night, Japan's Supreme War Council met in crisis. 6 men held the country's strategic direction in their hands. Suzuki, Togo, Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai, War Minister Anami, Army Chief of Staff Yoshijiro Umezu, and Navy Chief of Staff Soemu Toyoda. They could not agree. 3 leaned toward accepting the Allied terms, with preservation of the imperial institution. 3 resisted. The bombs had not broken the deadlock. They had made the deadlock unbearable. So Suzuki did something extraordinary. In the early hours of August 10th, during an imperial conference beneath the palace, he turned to Emperor Hirohito. The council was supposed to bring the emperor a unified recommendation. Instead, it brought him failure. Hirohito spoke. He said the war must end. He accepted the Potsdam Declaration with the condition that the imperial institution be preserved. The council adopted his position. But even that did not immediately reach the Japanese people, because a decision is not a broadcast. A broadcast needs a text. The text needs approval. The approval has to survive the military faction that still rejects the decision, and the emperor's voice has to be recorded. On the night of August 14th, Hirohito recorded the surrender message onto phonograph discs inside the Imperial Household Ministry. The discs were placed in safekeeping. That night, junior officers attempted a coup. They searched for the recording. They understood what it meant. If the emperor's voice reached the public, the war was over. They did not find the discs. At noon on August 15th, radios across Japan carried an announcement asking people to gather and listen. That alone was unprecedented. Workers stopped in factories, students gathered around speakers, soldiers stood near receivers. Families leaned toward radios that had spent 9 days telling them too little. Then the emperor's voice came through. For many Japanese civilians, it was the first time they had ever heard him speak. The language was formal, courtly, difficult. The audio was imperfect. Many listeners could not follow every sentence, but they heard enough. They heard the phrase about enduring the unendurable. They heard that the war situation had not developed to Japan's advantage. They understood, before the recording ended, Japan had surrendered. But the broadcast that ended the war did not explain Hiroshima. Not fully. It did not name the dead. It did not describe the city center. It did not tell families what survivors had seen when they crawled through streets that no longer looked like streets. It spoke of a new and cruel bomb. It spoke of suffering. It did not make an inventory of the people missing from the silence. That inventory was carried elsewhere, by survivors, by doctors, by railway workers, by military clerks writing reports from the edge of the destroyed zone, by families who learned the truth not from the state, but from someone arriving at the door with burned hands and no words left. By the end of 1945, Hiroshima's dead were often estimated between 90,000 and 166,000. That range is not just a statistic. It is evidence of a destruction so complete that counting became part of the ruin. Nagasaki's dead were commonly estimated between 60,000 and 80,000 by the end of that same year. But in the 9 days between the first bomb and the surrender broadcast, the Japanese public did not receive the truth in proportion to what had happened. They received controlled phrases. They received delayed announcements. They received official language that could not hold the weight of the event. The fuller truth moved more slowly, more painfully, and more honestly. One of the survivors, Tsutomu Tsuboi, was a 20-year-old student in Hiroshima when the bomb fell. He was burned across his face, arms, and back. He survived months of treatment. He lived into old age and spent decades testifying as a hibakusha, one of the people the first broadcasts had failed to name. He had carried a student identification card on the morning of August 6th. That small object outlasted the official silence. Tsuboi lived until 2021. The Emperor's surrender recording also survived. The disc the coup officers could not find still exists in the archives. 2 preserved objects, one carried by a burned student, one hidden from soldiers who wanted to stop the end of the war. Together, they tell a cleaner story than the first statements did. Japan's wartime information system had been built on one assumption. The government would know first. The public would learn later, and by controlling the order of disclosure, the state could control understanding. On August 6th, that assumption failed. For a few hours, Tokyo did not know more than the people outside Hiroshima. It only had better equipment for being confused. The wires went dead. The radio filled the gap with routine. The first official words arrived late and small, and the real report came from the people who walked out of the city carrying evidence no censor could edit. The radio told Japan the war was over. The survivors told Japan what the war had done.